Good afternoon. Sorry we had a little technical difficulty there. As I was saying, we're going to talk about the 2020 election and its effects on our nation and your life savings. There's a great model for what's happening now, and that's the Obama election in 2008. There was a lot of trepidation going into that election, a lot of fear about President Obama. In our March 23, 2009 letter calling the markets low, we stated that economic growth would be anemic due to the structure of the stimulus plan. But even with that structure, our investment returns would be accelerated as we chose to invest in a way that actually piggybacked on stimulus. And that is exactly what occurred. In the 8 years of Obama, gross domestic product growth was roughly about 1.3% per year, or less than half the historic multiple. And that cost our economy literally millions and millions of jobs. We also saw a massive outflow of our jobs, primarily to China and India. And yet our clients still made a lot of money, and many saw great returns in a terrible economy. Nationally, in our September 23rd, 2020 Facebook Live session, we started talking about the fact that we believed there would be no change in the United States House of Representatives majority, but that conservatives in the House would likely pick up 5 to 10 seats and narrow the gap, the 17-seat gap that gave Nancy Pelosi the speakership. That went against the prevailing view that liberals would pick up 10 to 15 seats. We have picked up a net of 5 seats so far. We believe that's likely to increase 1 or 2. Based on history in this election, they should have picked up seats. In second presidential terms, most of the time, vast majority of the time, the president does lose either the House and or the Senate. Election day on Tuesday this week, however, was a great day compared to what the pundits were saying. While conservatives were targeted and outspent by literally 2 or 3 to 1, many seat pickups occurred in the House. And in the Senate, we held the majority and may have actually built our lead by 1 or 2 seats. That's yet to be determined, and we won't know until probably early to mid-January. Never, in the best of my knowledge in political history, in the U.S. has there been a time where an opposing party, the Republicans, were outspent so badly and then did so well. We were told over the last year that a blue wave would sweep not only Biden into the presidency, but also retake the majority in the Senate and increase the majority of liberals in the House. Now, there's something I want to say that's very important. And we have to live with what is. But we do not believe the presidential race is over. While we fully acknowledge that at this point, Biden is the clear favorite, we know that court interventions can occur. And if they do occur, they could occur at the Supreme Court level as they did in 2020. Now let's talk a little bit about the election and its effects on our nation. In a Biden presidency, he's going to have to deal with a Senate that's firmly in conservative hands. And he has to deal with the most experienced Senate leader in the history of our country. That's Mitch McConnell. Senator McConnell's going to run the Senate like a clock, like he always has. And the Senate will be the stopping point for bad legislation. Biden will also be dealing with a chastened Democrat majority in the House that has shrunk significantly, and perhaps dealing with a different speaker. In other words, a speaker other than Nancy Pelosi. Now, Speaker Pelosi is doing everything she can now to hold on to power. For example, today she sent a letter to every member of the House asking them for their support for her speakership when they come up to leadership elections. But we believe there is going to be a challenge there, and she may lose her speakership. If not, she's going to be fractured. So Biden will work with a fractured House where the margin for error is considerably less and where a lot of Democrats have already been fired. And that's going to make putting his agenda through the Congress extremely hard. The Senate is going to be a brick wall, and the Senate is still going to control all federal appointments. That means his cabinet, Supreme Court justices, federal district and circuit court judges, etc. So a Biden presidency is stopped in going towards what I believe everyone truly fears, and that's socialism, the losing government of all time. The history of this election is going to show that Republicans, against all historical precedents, actually narrowed the margin significantly in the House and still maintain their majority in the Senate, and perhaps even pick up that additional 1 to 2 Senate seats. Now, if the courts get involved here in the presidential election, which I believe at this point is a very heavy lift, not likely to occur to a substantial extent, everything can change. If that occurs, I think all the blue states that came up with votes very quickly are going to be examined. Those issues can result in a vote swing, electoral vote swing, back to President Trump. We've seen elections with potential worse results than this one. We had that model because, as you might remember, President Obama was a disciple of a guy named Saul Alinsky, who was a lifelong communist, self-described, who wrote a very popular best-selling book called Rules for Radicals. And President Obama widely quoted passages from that book. The foreword of that book, by the way, was dedicated to Satan, because that's who Saul Alinsky worshipped. President Obama, using the tools from Rules from Radicals, did everything he could to fundamentally change our nation, and he didn't get it done. Even when, for the first 2 years of his term, he had a liberal House and a liberal Senate majority behind him. Now, I believe that same model is going to hold, except this time, this liberal president is not starting out with a cooperative Congress. And we also believe that in the 2022 election cycle, 2 years from now, we should see an opportunity for conservatives to actually take back the House and hold the Senate. Folks, I'm saying that because the conservative tent is wide open, and we've brought in a lot of new folks in this election. We also have a judiciary that is more firmly and constitutionally based judges' hands. Judges should always make their decisions based on constitutional prerogatives and not on their own personal feelings. So the effects of the nation, on the nation, in a Biden presidency are minimal for all those reasons. Now, Biden presidency can affect your life savings, but I want to say this clearly. Most of the electoral fears, if Biden successfully becomes president, are way overblown. While we believe there will be a more anemic economic growth with a Biden presidency, we also believe our portfolio performance should be exceptional. We think the economy under Biden in the first 4 years will still do very well. Why? Because those seeds for economic progress were planted in the last 4 years by President Trump and his policies. And as long as conservatives have the Senate, remember, bad legislation coming out of the House hits a brick wall. It's stopped. The other thing about life is true in politics, true in markets. Fear is always worse than the reality that occurs. And remember, we saw this same level of fear when Obama was elected, and none of those fears came to pass. So don't use fear to guide your investment decisions. Rely on the historical precedents and economic history. They're telling us something, and we need to learn. When I looked at our client portfolios months ago, realizing that this election may not go our way, we realized most of our portfolio holdings are likely to outperform, even more in a Biden presidency. And let me tell you why I say that. As you might be aware, the single largest sector that we're invested in, for example, is bank stocks. And one of the reasons we bought bank stocks is because long-term interest rates are at an all-time low. You can't go less than zero. So interest rates are going to increase, and when they do, it's going to be for 20 to 30 years. That's a normal cycle. That interest rate increase will drive up the value of our banks, which make money at a faster rate if interest rates are high on the long term and kept low on the short term. And the Fed's already told us that interest rates are going to stay at 0% on the short term for at least through 2022. Another issue that we need to talk about in the portfolio is CXW. And this is Core Civic, a private prison company. We've had several questions that have come in for this Facebook Live session, and I want to address this now. Core Civic has been a loser this year, primarily for two reasons. The first reason is they were effectively getting cut off from capital through loans from banks because of the far left. Same thing they did with gun manufacturers years ago. And for that reason, large international banks refused to lend to them. Working capital is the single largest cost for American corporations. This lack of working capital and the fact that they were structured and still are right now as a real estate investment trust meant that by law they had to pay out 85% of their net income. It's for that reason that a couple of months ago they changed their business format beginning on January 1st of this coming year to a C corporation from a real estate investment trust. That allowed them to not pay out the 15% average dividend we've been getting for the last couple of years on them, but to retain cash so they don't have to go to the bank to borrow for working capital. Core Civic also just released a very good third quarter earnings report. So we're going to see what happens as we get into December. And as we always do, we will evaluate any holding we have that's selling at a loss for tax loss sales to offset your capital gains this calendar year. We'll make a decision at that time. But right now, we believe we shouldn't change a thing. In the past 3 days, our clients saw their financial assets go up a total of 6.5% net of cost. During that time, the S&P went up 6.05. Why is that? We think the market rallies because the market perceives that if there is a President Biden, there will only be a President Biden with highly divided government to offset and balance his potential bad policies. And since he's checked by that divided government, the market is saying they don't believe he can damage the economy. I agree with that. Now, in the graphs you see on the screen now, you can see that even in an 8-year period where the economy's growth was stagnated, our clients' investments still grew. And they actually outpaced the market 5 out of the 7 years. The period we're showing is the first year of President Obama's election in 2009 through the end of 2016. And as you see on the blue line on the top chart, $250,000 invested with our firm, and this is all accounts net of all costs, would have grown over this incredibly stagnant economic growth time to $620,102. On the graph just below that, you see the S&P 500 total return, 232.7%. Not bad for an 8-year period of time. And on the right side, you see the evidence of one of the lowest growth periods of any presidency ever. In fact, it's the worst 8 years of GDP growth we've had since the Great Depression. Our investment methodology is proven to work extremely well, as you see from the charts, even under a very difficult presidency. And we believe it'll be the same under a Biden presidency. So allow me to summarize. This election is not over yet. It could drag out for quite some time. But don't worry about the outcome in terms of your investments, because a Biden presidency may actually help our portfolio more. The effects are the possibility of significant government change in a Biden presidency are very limited because of the fact that we have offsets in the Senate and a narrowed margin in the House. The current House Speaker can also be challenged, and with the Senate firmly in conservative hands, bad bills will not be able to get through. Next thing I'd like to cover is questions. So we've had several questions that have come in from clients. I've answered a couple of them, but I'm going to start on this one. Terry asks, there may well be 2 runoff Senate elections in Georgia. With a Vice President Harris, if the Dems get the majority in the Senate too, what then? In that case, it would be problematic. And I would have to evaluate very hard our portfolio structure and our current holdings. But I want to say this clearly. I'm very familiar with the 2 races for the Senate, and I do not believe there's an issue there. I started out saying that even though we are maintaining our majority previous to the election, that I think we can actually pick up 1 or 2 seats. So if I'm wrong, we're going to maintain the status quo. 2 of those seats I'm counting on are Georgia. Georgia is still a very conservative state, and the Republican candidates down there are really, really good candidates. And so after looking at all the returns that came in from those elections, we believe those seats are going to be maintained. If they're not, we got an issue and we'll deal with it. David asked about Core Civic and selling it. I covered that pretty well, but I'm going to mention this again. We will be looking at Core Civic very hard on a day-to-day basis. In a Biden presidency, it is the only portfolio element we have that we believe could truly be problematic in the accounts. If we sell it, it's likely to be closer to December and prior to the inauguration, so that we can produce for taxable accounts a tax loss sale that'll offset capital gains this year. Tom asked several questions, and I'm going to just cover these sequentially. One of the questions relates to, do we expect a significant sell-off in late 2020 or in 2021 due to 2022's expected tax policy changes, overspending, and economic downturns? 64% of people selling in the last 3 months have been making portfolio adjustments already, because remember, for the last 6 months we've been told there's an overwhelming loss to Trump and a win for Biden. So most of the portfolio adjustments are already done, I believe. And I think the evidence of that is the 6.5% return we've seen since the election day. So in those 3 days, 6.5%. It's kind of unusual, but that's the market telling us something. Markets like divided government. So no, I do not expect to see strong selling to lock in capital gains this year. The capital gains tax rate cannot change if the Senate is locked in. And at least at this point, it certainly looks like it is. 401k. I do not believe you should make any adjustments whatsoever to your 401ks. I don't think there will be any tax law change that's going to occur. One of the things that President Biden had proposed during the campaign was limiting contributions from high-income earners. Excuse me. And effectively reducing the tax benefit of those contributions by giving everyone a 28% write-off rate, regardless of your tax bracket. That can't occur except through the Congress, and the Senate is never going to approve that. Social Security changes is another question. There's not going to be any Social Security changes, in my opinion, for anyone who's 50 or over. Every time for the last 10 years plus that they've talked about changing Social Security, that has been the magic number. So I don't think we're going to see any changes there whatsoever. Or if we do, they will be grandfathered. Remember, although Biden seemed earlier in his career to be open to Social Security changes, there's a lot of people that have their hooks in him now. And in Harris, when and if she becomes the president. So I do not think that they're going to be able to touch that rail of politics that's considered sacred. How difficult will the forecasted economy be in late 2021 for business owners? There's always opportunity. There have been tens of thousands of new companies springing up in the last 4 months, while other companies shuttered and were taken down by COVID. I do not feel that business in America is going to fundamentally change because the legislation cannot get through to make it fundamentally change, and because the spirit of Americans is really good, regardless of who our president is. And we've proven that with past problematic presidencies. What is a good 4 to 5 year outlook for the economy and investment performance? Here's the deal. President Trump's policies are embedded in the economy. The trade agreements are already signed, and they're performing spectacularly. Whether a President Biden could build on that, that's a question. To be honest with you, I don't think he can. In the second term of Trump, we would have had an agreement with the EU, where specific companies, and primarily Germany and France, have taken great advantage of us in relation to tariffs and other trade issues. So that progress would be halted. But I don't think there's any way you undo USMCA, which Biden has stated was better than NAFTA, the bill he helped push through Congress that destroyed whole sectors of our economy. So the seeds are already there for, let's call it, economic greatness. I don't think they're going to want to uproot those seeds. Mission number one, if Biden becomes president, for him as a politician, or for the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of politicians, is political survival. So you watch how fast he cuts his ties to the socialist left. I'll bet you it happens very quickly. And if Harris becomes president, same thing. She's an opportunist. Her political survival is at stake. And they're all worried about their next term from the day they're inaugurated in office. I think a good 4 to 5 year outlook would be something on the 10 to 15-ish percentage return range. I'm basing that not on the market as a whole. I'm basing that on low valuations overall for our portfolios. Our portfolios are very deep discount, relatively high dividend, and are likely to outperform more in an economy that allows interest rates to float up faster, which would be a Biden economy. If there was a second term of Trump, I think the rate over the next 4 or 5 years would be closer to the 15% than it would to the 10%. In other words, it would be superior to a Biden presidency. But those returns, both, are significantly above the historical 9 to 10% return. Another question has come in, and that's, are Trump stocks versus Biden stocks being analyzed by SFA? And how do we focus or adjust to that? And what's being discussed here is, for example, do we move money into solar or take money out of oil? Well, we don't have any oil holdings for a lot of reasons. One of them being that we live in a completely energy independent country. We are the largest exporter of oil and natural gas in the world. We have more proven reserves than Saudi Arabia and Kuwait combined. So I don't want to jump on the solar bandwagon after it's been bid up extremely and after its valuations far exceed the cheap, high quality, well managed cash cows that we currently own. But I would not go into energy for the same reasons that I haven't prior. Is SFA poised to capitalize on 5G technology and investment trends? I'd say so. Qualcomm, since we've bought them, is up, I don't know, it's about 147% in the last 2 years. Yesterday, it closed up a little over 14% in a day. And Qualcomm is the proprietary owner of the vast majority of 5G technology. So we are uniquely poised. Qualcomm is, by our design, our single largest client holding. That kind of explains yesterday why the whole mass of our accounts had a 4.4% return for our clients. It was because of the Qualcomm movement. Post-COVID lessons. Walmart, Amazon, working virtually. Well, there is a lesson learned there for me, and that is if you own Amazon, Qualcomm, Twitter, you better dump them quickly, because the same thing that made them the strongest moving elements of the economy will cripple them, and that's COVID. COVID kept the lockdowns going. People had to access those services. They wanted their Netflix, and that caused 1 or 2 quarters of earnings to be buoyed up. People are going to go back to work. I've talked to a lot of people. We have hundreds of business owner clients in a wide variety of industries. They all have said the same thing. And this isn't just in Kentucky. It's all over the country. So COVID will end, and it will end soon. As we've consistently said, there will be widespread vaccine utilization by the end of the year. We've already got proven therapies, FDA approved. They're saving a lot of lives. The death rate continues to plummet, and while the press made a lot of hay about the number of cases going up, the hospital utilization rate and intensive care utilization rate has not gone up. It's actually declined. So we're in good shape, and as COVID ends, those stocks that benefited are going to be hammered. That's a really good question.
Kelly, we had one more question come in from Judy.
Go right ahead.
What about our airline stocks?
Same, guys, a lot of what we own. Marriott's another example. Delta's, of course, what Judy's asking about. They were purchased in April as an anticipation of something that had to happen eventually, and that was the economy reopening. I don't know if you guys remember, but back in April, the majority of analysts, economists, and I'm going to say investors, foolishly thought that it would take years to get a vaccine. And we were very clear. We said from March to April timeframe that there would be an effective vaccines prior to the end of the year and approved by the FDA. That's exactly what's going to happen. How did we know that? When President Trump said that that program was going to be run like the Manhattan Project, I flashed back to a client I had by the name of Dick Anderson. I studied the Manhattan Project as part of my military history at the United States Air Force Academy. But Dick lived it because he worked directly for Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, who was the head of the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was a less than 2-year effort to go from zero to an atomic and then a hydrogen bomb. And the reason it worked so effectively is it had full access to all federal government resources. Whatever they needed, they got that minute. No red tape. That's what President Trump meant. That's what he said. So I knew the vaccine would come across very, very quickly. What was the rest of that question?
The airline stocks.
Yeah, so on the airline stocks, again, everything's related to the economy reopening. That's the only thing that can happen. The fear that the economy never reopens was another false fear, just like 99% of them are. It's going to reopen. Boeing's going to get the 737 MAX approved likely this month. The European Union's aviation consortium has already approved the 737 MAX coming back into use. So the FAA is going to follow very quickly with that, I anticipate. So Boeing's back in the air. Delta's passenger loads are picking up, as are Americans. If the economy shuts down in some of the hotspot areas, which they are kind of doing in some of those areas right now, don't worry about it because the election's over. And I will bet you that very quickly, governors in those states who so freely violated their state and federal constitutional parameters by depriving folks of their businesses, their educations, their livelihoods, and their freedom, will declare that COVID is magically solved. And please give me a call if anybody wants to make that bet. It'd be a really bad bet. I wouldn't take it. So I think the airline stocks will come back dramatically, just like Marriott already has. Same thing with Royal Caribbean. We've got a small smattering of that. Those cruises will be happening again likely prior to the end of the year. Anything else, guys?
Sir?
All right, let me summarize here. So we're in a very difficult season. This has been a tough year. Terrible election. Worst of my lifetime, for sure. We've had a great administration who put American values, American freedoms, American jobs first. I am prayerfully hoping that President Biden will do the same. And I think we should all give him that benefit of the doubt if things, lean the way they look like they're leaning and he becomes our next president. If President Trump is reelected, and he may be, because there are core challenges now and they could get accelerated. If he does become our president, his policies are going to stay in place and they'll be put on steroids. That would be better for our economy, which means in a Biden presidency, economic growth is going to be slower. Either way, we expect your investments to perform very well. And I hope and pray that Americans come together as we're supposed to as one nation and give either of these men the benefit of the doubt for the first year or so, just like we did with President Obama, so that they've got the opportunity to show that they really are trying to do what's best for our country. With that, I want to say thank you. Please contact us with any questions you may have out of this, and God bless you and God bless the United States of America.